Welcome to the 6th webinar in Washington OSPI's Expert Webinar Series, provided in partnership with Glean Education. Thank you. Next slide. This Expert Webinar Series is part of a larger initiative between Washington OSPI and Glean Education to build educator capacity to deliver structured literacy within an MTSS framework in our state. To learn more, please visit the links in the chat. This webinar is being recorded, and you can find the presenter's slides and handouts in the Padlet link in the chat as well. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our organizational partner in this work, Glean Education, and their founder and CEO, Jessica Hammond.
Thank you, Rebecca. It is a pleasure to work with OSPI as a part of this initiative. For those of you who do not know about us yet, we are Glean Education, and we partner with schools, districts, and states to deliver online training and web-based coaching. We help teachers understand current research and implement evidence-based literacy practices to improve student literacy outcomes. Learn more about us at gleaneducation.com or visit us on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter at Glean Education. This is the 6th webinar in our series this year on structured literacy within an MTSS framework, featuring some of the nation's top experts. If you haven't already registered for them, we have the link in the chat, and please do so. They are amazing presentations. Attendees who register for and attend the full webinar are eligible for 1 clock hour per webinar. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Robert Putnam and Christine Downs. Dr. Robert Putnam is the Executive Vice President of Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports, PBIS, and Consultation at the May Institute. As head of the Institute's research-based school-wide behavioral support program, Dr. Putnam oversees a team of school consultants and provides consultation to districts throughout the country relative to effective emotional, social, behavioral support interventions. Dr. Putnam is a licensed psychologist and certified health service provider who has served on the faculty of Harvard Medical School. Dr. Putnam is widely published, including 40 books, chapters, manuscripts, scripts, and briefs, and has given more than 250 presentations at school districts and national conferences on topics related to development and implementation of effective discipline, applied behavioral analysis, functional behavioral assessment, and positive behavioral support practices. He is the recipient of over $1.5 million in grant funding. He serves as a national implementation partner and subject matter expert on autism with the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Special Education Programs National Technical Assistance Center for PBIS. In 2021, his efforts earned him the May Institute's prestigious President's Award. Christine Downs is the Director of Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports in Randolph, Mass. She has spent over 30 years serving children, youth, and adults with a focus on helping schools and human services agencies create safe, effective, and supportive environments. At the May Institute, Ms. Downs, along with the PBIS team, provides training, coaching, and technical assistance support for nearly 100 districts and schools across Massachusetts and New England. Prior to joining the May Institute, Ms. Downs spent 10 years working with high needs and high risk youth in school-based residential and juvenile settings. She transitioned to improving systems at the school, district, and state level. Christine served on the New York statewide PBIS evaluation committee, and in 2008 was recognized for her work in PBIS by the NYS Board of Regents. Please welcome Dr. Robert Putnam and Christine Downs.
Hello, everybody, welcome. We're very excited to have the Washington State and Glean Education welcome us to provide this webinar. Christine and I both have been involved in implementing PBS for over 20 years. both in really small rural schools as well as very large urban schools. Worked out, or at least I'm coming from the Boston area, and people say I have a wicked Boston accent. I park the car in Harvard Yard on a regular basis, just so you'll get used to that. So why is PBS MTS important? We have a lot of research, and you can see one of the first things on the left in terms of improving student outcomes is academic performance. And you might say, well, you guys don't teach literacy or you don't teach math, but one of our goals, and Christine's really going to talk a lot about it, is really having students in class and academically engaged is one of our strong focus. And as well as improving social emotional competence. And again, in the middle there, reduced exclusionary discipline. We want to keep kids in class and on task. And probably the most important box is improving teacher outcomes, that we really would like to improve teacher wellness and teacher efficacy and increase school safety. So next. So why is classroom management? There is a clear inverse relationship between academic performance and problem behavior across grade levels. That many students who basically have academic challenges also have behavioral challenges. One of the questions I'm often asked is, if I have a child with academic challenges and behavior challenges, what should I do first? Look at the academic challenges or the behavior challenges. And what we've seen from our research is really doesn't make any difference where you start on the academic side or on the behavior side, the social side. And the goal is we really need to address both of them. And as I said, about probably about a third to 50% of kids with academic challenges have behavior challenges. One of the things we see is basically teachers are really not equipped to effectively manage classroom dynamics. It's often reported as one of their highest need for professional development. And what we really focus on is really hands-on training on those effective classroom management strategies. Next. And what we see when we provide performance feedback, that we see both confidence, knowledge, increased teacher efficacy in implementing classroom behavior support procedures. Next. So the challenge is really how do we deal with in terms of improving academic engagement, having students in class. So one of our goals is really to move away from punitive, exclusionary, reactive discipline practices to positive, preventative, inclusionary practices. And that's really what PBS is all about, is moving away from those types of interventions. Now, all of you have seen this triangle, right, that we're really looking at. And you've had a lot of probably the webinars that focused on the left side, which is academic systems. We're really going to talk about on the right-hand side. So we really want to look at in terms of developing effective universal interventions, which what we call is a positive behavior support intervention plan that would cover all students, all settings. And then we're really looking at in terms of those students who don't respond, that we have small group interventions that either educators or other mental health folks would deliver, or standardized interventions that would be very clear in terms of this is the way. One of those is what we call check in, check out. And then we're looking at individualized intensive interventions for those students who are not responsive. So the schools that we work with really do a great job at the universal interventions. Targeted group interventions have a lot fewer kids that need to have those intensive individual interventions. And when I ask teachers and educational staff, do you have any extra time? Consistently I get no, I don't have any extra time. So we really want to focus on those universal and targeted group interventions. Next. So kind of our two, what we call our tattoos. One was that triangle. That way, if people understand the triangle, this is our second tattoo. Is really, we're looking at, people think PBS is just about practices, but really it's about systems. Is how do we build the systems to support our staff actually engaged in the practices. So we're really looking at database teams at each of those later levels to really work on making good decisions. And if we're looking at academic engagement, is how do we improve that? How do we support actually teachers and other educational staff engaging in those practices that will improve our data, which is academic engagement or less problem behavior. So when we talk about tier one, as well as in terms of in classes, we're really looking at a clear set of positive expectations. Be respectful, be responsive, be safe, and that we're actively teaching those expectations. And we're coming up with a continuum of procedures for encouraging those expectations. And this would be developed by your school team. And then we're looking at a continuum of procedures for discouraging inappropriate behavior. And then most importantly, we have ways that we can progress monitor how we're doing in terms of moving forward. Next. And we like to look at data to help us make good decision-making, progress monitoring. So one of the things that's really important is that we really are measuring fidelity, because all the great work we've done, we've really looked at schools that implement with fidelity. On the National Technical Assistance site, there is a fidelity measure for across all the tiers. And you can see in the middle down at the bottom, you can see there's improvements in terms of tier one fidelity, going from about 20% to about 60%. Usually we're looking at about 70% for fidelity. And we would not expect that you get good outcomes unless you got to 70%. And so some of the data we're looking at around office discipline referrals, and on the left-hand side is where the top graph, we're looking at the amount per month. We're also looking at on the bottom right, what problem behaviors, where does it happen? You can see the graph up above, the problem behavior. It focuses really on classrooms, and that's where we spend a lot of our time. And next. So this is the website for the PBS Technical Assistance Center. It's made up. It's funded by the Department of Education around research and training and dissemination around positive behavior support. It's your tax dollars at work. There's just a lot of resources here that are free. And so I would strongly suggest that you check it out. On the left-hand side, there's just a whole lot of different topics here. And we have many briefs. So these are like 3 or 4 practices that we would suggest that you could look at. So these aren't, academic presentations. There's academic research behind them, but it's an easy way to kind of figure out in terms of what could help and support you. So again, I'm very pleased to be here. Check out the PBIS.org website, and I'm going to turn this over to Christine.
Thanks, Bob. Great. So, like Bob said, a school-wide PBIS, we see really some amazing results, both social, emotionally, behaviorally, and academically. But we know not all of your schools are fully implementing it. You might just be getting started or exploring. And so we want to give you some really wonderful high leverage classroom practices that you can use tomorrow. And you can set up your classrooms at the beginning of the year next year to really make the most of your minutes. We know most of these webinars and this project is focused on literacy. And we know that's a big chore, right? Teaching people how to read. And so we want to take those precious minutes and use them wisely and not spend a lot of time redirecting behavior and responding to behavior. So we want to use our instruction, our effective instruction and good classroom management to close that opportunity gap, that achievement gap that we see out there. And this is a school district in Oregon that spent, you can see, about 6 years, probably a little bit more, working to, on both sides of that triangle, the tiered interventions, both academically and behaviorally, to close that gap between their white students and their Latino students. And it's pretty impressive because the gap was pretty wide. And like Rob Horner, the former co-director and founder of the National PBIS DA Center, always says, it's his mantra, right, Bob? Do the simplest thing that you can do that will result in the biggest outcomes. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go over 4 practices. And there's probably a lot of teachers who look at these practices at the bottom: maximizing structure and predictability, building relationships, the 5-to-1 praise to correction ratio, and actively supervising and engaging students with lots of opportunities to respond. So there might be a lot of teachers saying, oh, that's what we do all the time. And teachers do these things. But are we doing them with fidelity? Are we doing them consistently? Are we doing them for all students, not just some? Sometimes we do these strategies with our students who are doing well, who are functioning pretty well academically and behaviorally, and then we pile on for the students who are challenged, and we need to even that out. So we did provide several resources to glean, and I believe it'll be on your Padlet. One of them is this classroom management assessment here. This can be used individually with a teacher or school-wide to assess where your teachers are at, where they feel comfortable with some practices and might need professional development for others. I'm not going to go into that too deeply, but we did want to provide that to you. So the first strategy we're going to talk about is maximizing structure and predictability. Human beings are creatures of habit. We like things predictable. When I do in-person trainings, if it's a 2-day trainings, teams will come in and take the exact same table and sit in the exact same chair, right? They don't have to, and they sort of get miffed if a different team takes their table, right? We like things structured. We like to know what's coming next. When is lunch? Will we be taking breaks, right? We like to know those things. Kids like that too. And it's even more important for students and our young ones, because their frontal lobe is not fully developed yet, right? That's all that executive functioning and planning and what am I supposed to do and where do I look? So we want your classroom, it can be bright and full of wonderful things, but it should have some structure to it. You know, where do I look for the word wall? Is there a number line? And where do I look for that? Maybe there's some routines that have instructions for when we get into small groups, and I know exactly where to look for that if I'm curious. The dates on the board, where's the homework? So all of these things really help students feel calmer and secure when they walk into the classroom. And if you're a teacher or you're a person sort of like me, a little more chaotic, you have those experts within your building. Go to other classrooms, check out even different grade levels. Find classrooms that you say, wow, you know what? I'd love for my class to look like this. And ask those teachers, hey, can you help me set up mine? Or can I take some pictures? All the experts on what we're going to talk about today are within your schools. It's sort of finding them and elevating them. Right? So one of the things we also offer here is this classroom routine checklist. It's got about 14 common routines classes go through, and then there's some places to fill in others. And first you want to ask yourself, is this routine problematic? So for example, entering the classroom, is that a problem, right? Are kids wild? They're leaving stuff everywhere. They're loud, they're disruptive, they're playing with materials. If that's a problem, then what's your routine for that? How do you want them to enter? And if you have a routine, have you actually taught the routine? If you don't teach it, they're not going to know it. We have to teach it, practice it, and reinforce it. One way you can kind of write up your routines is by creating a matrix. Now, those of you who know MTSS behavior or PBIS know that this is very common. If we're talking school-wide, we'd have these expectations or core values across one side, things like respectful, responsible, safe, be a learner. And then down the other side would typically be locations throughout the school. So the bathroom, the hallway, the cafeteria, things like that, the bus. But in a classroom, which is sort of the microcosm of the school and where problem behavior is really the most disruptive because it disrupts learning, we think about, instead of locations, we think about routines, right? So entering the class routine, handing in assignments and homework, working in group, exiting class, maybe how to ask for help, how to ask to take a break. Those are things kids need, and sometimes we rarely teach that, right? And even asking for help can be different if I'm working alone, if the teacher's instructing, if we're in a small group, there might be different ways. So we have to actively teach these things, and we just sort of spell it out. What does it look like? What does it sound like? Might be in the room before the bell rings, and so on. Voice level 0 or 1, we walk, we find our seat, we get started, right? Very clear instructions. And this sets our kids up in the beginning. I know what's expected of me, and we need to take time. So I'm going to play a clip. There's videos throughout. I'm going to not play them all. This is actually going to be the longest video I play because I think what she does is so descriptive and so wonderful. I do encourage you to go back and watch some of the other videos. They're full of wonderful gems. So here's the first one.
Get there, okay? So we're going to take some time, and I'm going to show you exactly where I want you to sit and how I want you to get there quickly, okay? So for my ELA transition, I start with students' numbers, usually alphabetical at first, and then I give them an exact spot to sit on at the carpet. And then I explain to them exactly what I want them to do. When you hear your number or your name, I want you to get up, push your chair in, and come to this particular seat. Sarah, Adam, and Kaden, come. It's important to make sure that students are following your expectations on the first day of school, on the first week of school, because if students know exactly what it is you want them to do, or in this instance, exactly where it is you want them to sit, then they can rely on that, and that makes your transition so much faster, and then you can get to things like your lesson much quicker. No, honey, sit right next to her. Scoot up right next to her. Scoot up right next to her. During that ELA transition, I had them practice it over and over again because I want for them to know exactly where they sit so that they can get there quickly. Please join me on the carpet. It took us 1 minute and 8 seconds, which is not too bad, okay? As we continue to go throughout the school year, we are going to be looking to chop down just a little bit, second by second, at that time, okay? But look at, everybody remembers where they're supposed to go. Give yourselves a round of applause. That was very good for the first time. Think about where your spot is, because I'm going to set the timer. Remember, it took us 1 minute, 8 seconds yesterday. Let's see if we can shave a little bit of time off of that today. Go. "56 seconds. Good job, my friends. Excellent work. All right,
So that's just an example, right? She made it fun. She was clear. She was explicit. And she spent time with them practicing. And then she reinforced them, right? Give yourselves a hand, right? That's what we want to do. We really want to be clear, right? Then once we teach those, we need to prompt students to use our new skills. So we've probably all heard this one before.
1, 2, 3, eyes on me.
1, 2, eyes on you.
Right? That's a routine for getting attention. right? The younger students we tend to have more routines and more sort of call and response, but that can work for older students too. The other thing we want to do is right before an activity, just spend that 30 seconds, 15 seconds discussing what is the procedure for what we're about to do. What do we expect? So this is just a high school teacher right before test taking, just going over the expectations of test taking.
Does anybody have any questions? Sure? Okay, what's one of our expectations during test taking? Being silent. Thank you for raising your hand. Good job.
Raise our hand.
Raise your hand when you have a question. Excellent. Do your own work. Okay, one more. Stay in your seat. You guys have got it.
So it takes almost no time, but it brings that information right to the front of the brain, that metacognition, and they can recall that. And that's what we want, right? So structure to start off with, but that's not enough. We want to build relationships. We know almost every study that looks at this, and this is a review of 46 different studies, found that that strong teacher-student relationship is associated with pretty much every measure schools care about, both short-term and long-term. So higher student academic engagement, attendance, higher grades, fewer disruptions and suspensions, exclusionary type of discipline, lower dropout rates. Building relationships is so key, right? So that's going to be our second strategy. And one way that you can start to build this is by something called thresholding or greeting students at the door. Now, we know many teachers do this. This strategy is so much bang for your buck. I'm going to show you some research after this and some study results. And it's really shocking how powerful this is to creating that relationship. Please go back and watch this video. It's a little bit longer and more detailed. I'm going to show this one. It's a little bit quicker, but they're wonderful. It's a wonderful video, and it really demonstrates what we're talking about here.
Long time no see, Miss Kayla.
I use a technique called thumbs at the door to greet my students in a way that is personal, quick, and efficient. I do it at the door because it helps build that relationship with each student individually without having to go from desk to desk to desk. It's T for touch. Since touch is not comfortable for everybody,
Hi, Damien. You want to help today?
I give them the option of either a high five, a handshake, a hug, or a fist bump.
Emily.
U is for use their name.
What's up, Cody?
They know that I know who they are.
Marco.
And they're not just some random kid out of my long list of students. When you make eye contact with them, you show that you truly care about what they're saying or that they're there. And S is for smile, because smiling is a good way to start off your day. It sets you up for a positive lesson. Thumbs at the door is a way for me to build relationships with my students and a way for them to be welcomed into my classroom every day.
So I know this seems, oh, I got to get my class ready. I'm setting up my materials. I don't really have time to go greet every kid at the door. Is that necessary? Maybe I'll do it, once in a while. Let me just show you why it's really powerful. So I'm going to show you a couple of different studies here. So the first one is speed to task engagement. So how quickly kids are getting started on that first task that you want them to get started with. So you can see here, the researchers went in and did some baseline observations and just timed how long it took kids to get started on their task. And you can see it took anywhere from a minute and a half to sometimes upwards to around 5 minutes for those kids to get started. And again, those are precious minutes, right? 5 minutes of one kid means you're probably not starting with the whole class until everybody's on task. So getting them started quickly is important. When they're coming in for the greeting, that's another time. She didn't discuss this, but you can also be saying, remember, get your do now, get started on that. You can be giving them those little prompts for getting started in the day. But they came back, and they didn't just come back once, they came back several times to measure this. And you can see that solely after teacher greeting, the task engagement, the initiation to getting started increased or decreased considerably, right? What was 5 minutes is under a minute now, typically, right? Couple of seconds. This kid went down 20, 30 seconds, right? That makes a big difference. And we're also building that relationship. So they get to get started quicker, but they also stay on task longer, right? Again, the initial baseline, students were on task 50, 60% of the time. Post intervention, and the intervention is just teachers greeting students at the door. We see students are upwards between 80, 90% of the time, right? They're getting started quicker, they're staying engaged longer. Relationship building is so key, especially when we're thinking about disruptive behaviors. This study has a control group in it, and you can see both the control group and the positive group, the group that got the intervention, were disruptive about 15% of the time, and the control group pretty much stayed steady. But after the first group got the positive greeting at the door, we can see that their disruptions went down to below 5% of the time. Again, significant, because all those disruptions pull away learning time from everybody, not just the student who's being disruptive. And we see that academic engagement, same thing. For the control group, stays pretty flat, but for the positive greeting at the door group, went from about 60% of the time engaged to over 80% of the time. Isn't that what we're looking for? Students who are getting to task, staying on task, being more engaged and less disruptive, right? Talk about bang for your buck. If you can do one thing, I highly recommend you start building this habit now and take it into next year with you, because this is really powerful. Okay, so moving on from that, and to continue that relationship building, it's real, and the structure and predictability. We need to acknowledge when students are doing the right behavior, right? We spend an inordinate amount of time dealing with our disruptors. And we know that our brains are wired for that acknowledgement, hearing our name, feeling good. That feels really great to, especially to students, to younger people. And if you look at this cartoon, I think it really sums things up, right? The little girl sitting here wondering why she has to sit up front all the time. And the teacher says, you know, because you can't behave yourself like Todd. And she's like, who? Right? And he says, well, that's me. And she's like, what? Sitting back there. And he says, you know, since kindergarten. He thinks about it and goes home, and her dad says, you know, what'd you learn in school today? That good behavior makes you invisible. And that's what it's like for a lot of kids, right? We spend probably 90% of our attention on about 10% of our kids. And it's not good for anybody, because that attention we're spending on that 10% is typically negative attention. It's not even positive, proactive attention. So we really need to flip that script, because we know the quickest way to change behavior in anybody is to point out what they're doing correctly. And we can change behavior almost up to 80% by just pointing out what people are doing correctly. And if you get pushback, this is not what real life. Adults don't get reinforced. That's ridiculous. Why should we reinforce students for doing what they're supposed to do in school? Well, you can show them this, right? We as adults get acknowledged all over the place, starting with our paycheck, right? But we're supposed to drive carefully on the road. If we do, we get discounts on our insurance, right? Cash back and airline rewards, and teachers even for getting more. You guys are going to get a PDP hour, right? For being a part of this webinar. And for a lot of you, that might go towards a higher step in your pay, right? That's all ways we get acknowledged for doing what we're supposed to do, right? We want to really build those synapses in their brains. And to do that, students need to practice, and they need to be acknowledged when they get it right. The other thing is that we take in positive and negative information differently, and we store it in different hemispheres. Negative information, negative feedback And emotions generally involve more thinking. We perseverate on it, ruminate about it. You might talk to your husband or your friend. Do you really think this is true? Somebody said this about me. I can't stop thinking about it. We might dream about it, right? That negative stuff really eats at us. Even if it's someone we don't like who says it to us, it kind of really gets to us. And those negative events wear off more slowly than the positive. Oh, somebody tells us we do a good job. We feel good in the moment, but we might not just sort of ruminate on it again and again and really keep ourselves up. It sort of comes and goes. And most people can only take in one critical comment at a time. And think about some of our kiddos who are getting lots of negative feedback. Right? Stop that, put that down, come in, take your seat, get up, put that away, sit on your bottom, right? All of these negative comments, well, we might just think of them as correction, but when they're all coming at you, it doesn't feel so good, right? And they're thinking about it, boy, I can't do anything right here for this teacher. So we want to flip that, right? We need to increase the positives. And we used to say about 4 positives to every correction. Kind of upping it now to about 5 to 1, because like we said, they're not even in our brain. We need more positives to compensate for how much we spend thinking about those negatives. And they're not 5 to 1 for each kid, right? If I have to make a correction, or I might say, this side of the room is getting a little bit loud. Okay, I like how you guys are working hard. Good. Excellent. Thank you for quieting down so quick. Nice job. All right. Looks like everybody is ready to learn. So there I made a correction and made a bunch of statements, right? And I was clear about what they did. You guys are doing a good job. Quiet. You got quiet and look like you're ready. Everyone's ready to learn. I'm explicit about what I'm telling them. And that's part of that positive feedback. Not just saying, yep, okay, good job, everyone. Well, good job for what? For sitting, for looking, for what? Right. There is also, I wanted to put in here a really nice app that you can get for your phone. It's called Be Positive. B+ is how you would look for it. It's a free app. The National Technical Assistance Center created it. And you can actually measure yourself. You can click, and for every positive and negative you give, you can set up like alarms for yourself to pre-correct or check in with certain kids. It gives you some nice graphs and statistics, right? You can measure opportunities you give students to respond and be engaged. So it's a great little free app. I encourage you to check out. Right? And there's lots and lots of ways to acknowledge students, right? We can give them little tickets and pom-pom jars and certificates, and all of those are wonderful. And I have to say, I still have my 4th grade Most Improved Handwriting Award, and I'm 55. So it's powerful, right? But that doesn't matter. What really matters is the positive social interaction that you're having. Like that teacher said, the looking in the eye, saying your name, like, oh, Bob, you did such a wonderful job. Thank you for that nice introduction, whatever you're saying, right? We want to create that relationship and build those synapses so that they do it again that way next time, right? Because that felt good, right? So really verbal is just as powerful as anything else. If you're using a tangible, you want to make sure you're pairing it with good verbals, that you're saying explicitly what the student did. There's 4 videos here. Don't worry, I'm not going to show them all. This one I just think is quite powerful because it's also kids acknowledging each other.
Front table shout outs.
I have a shout out for Annalia. She got to work really fast.
A shout out is a positive comment given from one peer to another. Shout outs are such an effective strategy for anyone, and you can throw them in anywhere. They're easy, they're quick. The first thing is a ding on my little chime, which gets everyone's attention.
I see almost everybody.
I will ask each group to give a shout out to someone that they noticed was doing a particularly good job or doing something that was difficult for them.
I have a shout out for Alex because she was working really hard on her chicken.
Awesome, awesome.
It's not just me as the teacher saying, you're doing well. It's a way for them to interact with each other and celebrate positivity. We notice, we focus on the things that are going well.
I have a shout out to Jamari because he was reading good.
Yeah,
I love that. It's not just the teacher acknowledging it, it's students acknowledging others. And did you hear how explicit they were being? She got to work really quickly. She worked hard on her reading. They know they know the challenges each other's face. And they are acknowledging each other. Think about not just the relationship between students and the teacher, but the classroom environment and how much more positive that is. Isn't that a better place to learn? Right. So you want to get those positives up. A lot of teachers, that app is really helpful because a lot of us really think we're doing a good job, and we go in and we do measurements with teachers and we take baseline and sometimes we start with like, who's the teacher who does the best, the most positive acknowledgement, and we'll go in and they're still maybe at a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 ratio. And it surprises even them. They think, no way, I have to be doing at least 5-to-1. But they don't realize how many corrections come out of our mouths every day for so many kids. So having someone do that app, or just if you have another adult in the room doing little hash marks every time I give a positive statement versus a negative reinforcement statement to students, that's what we're talking about. Not just, hey, it's a lovely day, but that interaction, and see where you're at, because that is such a powerful tool. And I'm going to show you why. Oops. So the praise to correction ratio, we would like you to get it up to 5-to-1, but this study just looked at, even if you can get the praise to correction ratio at a 1-to-1 rate, right, it decreases problem behaviors. The black line here is the ratio. So you can see it's below 1-to-1. And this gray line is the percentage of time that they're being disruptive. And you can see prior to anything, they were much more disruptive, right? About 40% of the time. You can look at the other ones as well. Then they went in and did some feedback and modeling and taught them how to do it, and came back on a number of occasions. You can say this is, again, not just, oh, sure, the first time you came back, it was fine. Nope, they came back many times. And we can see how those disruptions dropped as the ratio just even got to 1-to-1, right? Again, think about every time we drop from 40% problem behaviors to below 20, that's more time on reading. That's more time on academics and engagement, right? And teachers could even see like, oh yeah, when I kind of dropped off a little bit, yep, the problem behaviors went up again, right? But when I was consistent and gave more positives to negatives, the behavior dropped. We even see that the ratio of praise to correction with students at risk of emotional and behavioral disabilities, we see that the peer group, right? Higher praise is great. They like it. It makes a better classroom, but they might not need it. They're engaged pretty much of the time, right? But these at-risk students went from 70% engagement to a little bit over 80% of the time engaged. And these are our kiddos who really struggle to be engaged. So again, that hearing what they're doing right, getting that positive teacher attention instead of negative, because they'll take the negative attention because they need some attention, but we flipped it and we've showed them how to be engaged and how to get it the right way, right? And again, the disruptions go down. Here, it's showing when teachers use higher rates of reprimand, the engagement actually goes down. So kids are less engaged when you give them more and more corrections and reprimands. That's not the way to get those kiddos back and focused. The disruptions, right? When we use lots of reprimands, disruptions go way up. Because, if you're going to call me out on everything I do, I might as well be the best bad kid in the room. I'm going to get a lot of attention that way because I'm not getting it any other way. We have to show them that there is another way. I can't tell you how many times I hear teachers say, that's not the right way to get attention. But then they do the right thing. And instead of attention, the teacher says nothing. They're not actively ignoring that kid. They just think, oh, don't say anything. They've done it right. No, you've got to call it out when they've done it right. That's the thing that motivates them to do it right again next time. One more time, again, engagement. We might need a higher ratio for these students. This was when the ratio started out as 1 positive to 19 corrections, engagement pretty low. For our high needs kiddos, it might need to be 9 or 10 positive statements for every correction, but we can pull them back up to where their typical peers are. So again, lots of research to back this up. All right, so right now we've got structured environment, positive relationships we're building, giving them lots of reinforcement for the things they're doing right, good feedback, but that's not enough. We really need to now pull in that academic engagement, right? We know that kids in elementary school feel much more engaged and optimistic about their learning, and it kind of goes down as students get older, and we want to keep that up. So there's lots of ways to actively engage students in observable ways. This is some examples for when you're doing review and doing some teaching. You know, typically we go, raise your hand, who's got the answer? And that often relies on the quickest processor to answer the question. And there's a whole bunch of kids who are like, Jessica's going to answer this one. I don't even have to bother, right? And they sit back and they don't process that answer. So we want to give them, everybody, an opportunity. We can make some simple signs, right, for engagement. I'd like to add something. I agree. We can even ask them to use their fingers. Who thinks it's answer number 1 or 2 or 3, right? There's some great electronic ways, Plickers and Kahoots, that will make graphs. This one, kids hold up the answer. They can see it on the back, A, B, C, D, and then you scan it with a tablet, and it'll make these wonderful graphs that you can show the kids. And talk about engagement. They're waiting for the next question. They're listening. They're hanging on. When do I get to do it again? Right? It pulls them in. There's lots of great ways. Again, I encourage you to watch this video about thumbs up. This is a very subtle way of engagement. But choral responding, we're talking about reading fluency. I'm hoping you do a lot of choral kind of stuff. We see it a lot in foreign language learning, but we can do it in just about any subject. You can do it.
All right, remember we talked about sponges? Yeah. Who remembers what we said about the way sponges eat? I'm gonna get you guys to do it as a class. We know that the water goes in the pores, out through the oscillation. I only see half of you doing it. Let's do that. The water goes in through the pores, out through the oscillation. Good job for you. Okay, we also talked about cnidarians. Okay, remember cnidarians? When did I teach you to remember cnidarians? How did they act? How do polyps act? Go ahead and do it. I know you remember. Tell us.
Your tentacles are at the top.
And what else is in the middle of the tentacles?
The mouth.
Let me see those polyps. Do I have to sing? Raise your hands, raise your tentacles in the air and wave them like you just don't care. And all the polyps in the room say, oh yeah. Oh yeah. All right, you do.
So it can be a little corny, but think about how fun that class is, right? Oh, she's so corny, she makes us sing. But I'm saying it, I'm hearing it, I'm interacting. I'm going to remember it much more effectively. So there's so many different ways for engaging and opportunities to respond. We want to give kids lots and lots of opportunities to respond. Typically in presentations, we like to do a lot of give and take, put things in the chat. This format is just not set. We have a limited amount of time, but you would be more engaged if I was asking for feedback from you. So we really want students to have that opportunity. And so we've included 2 resources. One's from Florida PBIS, and it's about, 12 pages full of strategies to increase academic engagement, all sorts of different kinds of activities. And they have lots of resource links connected to it. I encourage you to do that. And then there's another one from the Vanderbilt University around opportunities to respond. I think some of the research says they should be responding several times a minute. That can be hard to do, but if you just start to build that in, right, it's really powerful. And then added on to that is active supervision, proactively walking around and supervising students when they're in individual work and group work. It's very easy to have the tendency to go back to our desk and grade some papers or get ready for the next thing or just breathe for a second. But we know that there are kids sitting there not doing their work. They're confused. They don't quite know how to ask for your help. They're off task. If we're walking around, we can interact. We can say, hey, is everything okay? Oh, I like your heading. Nice job getting started. Oh, are you having a little difficulty there? Do you need some help? So we're engaging with the student. Again, relationship building. We're not waiting till the end of that activity and going, you didn't do anything at all that whole time? No, because we're actively supervising, proactively monitoring what's going on in our classrooms. I'm not going to play this video, but I do look at it. And the key here is moving around your classroom, interacting with students, and then scanning around. Is there anything else that's an issue? So now I'm just going to give you a couple of slides about how we put this together at the May Institute. We work with classrooms like Bob mentioned before, and we go in there and do some observations and give teachers training and feedback on these 4 things that I just reviewed with you. So first we go in and take some baseline data. We watch the teacher for about 15 seconds, and then the first student, and then we go back to the teacher, and then the second student, and we do that for about 20 minutes. And we see if the teacher is actively instructing, whether they're praising or correcting or giving an opportunity to respond to their students, or actively supervising. Pretty much everything we just talked about. And then when we looked at the students, we're looking, are they on task? Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing? And you can see, this teacher, we want to get to that about 80% threshold of student engagement and on-task behavior. So we can see, their praise to correction ratio was a little bit low. No opportunities to respond, low active supervision. We give them the brief training, feedback, look at their data, help them make an action plan of, okay, what am I going to work on? And you can see this teacher said, I'm going to work on opportunities to respond, flip my praise to correction ratio, right? And we move students up to being on task much more of the time. We hit our threshold of 80%. And again, here's the teacher. This one's a little more difficult. They're a little more off task on their ratio, their praise to correction ratio, way off. On task about 60% of the time, but using opportunities to respond and active supervision. Went back, did brief training and feedback. Students, she did better. She flipped her praise ratio, right? A little more supervision, but students still at about 60% of the time. So sometimes it doesn't happen by magic, right? We've got to work at it. We've really got to make an effort. So came back a third time after reviewing her performance, going back over the different areas. And again, the praise, she got even higher. She got to a 3-to-1 positive to correction ratio. Lots of opportunities to respond, engaging students. If I'm engaged and you're asking me for things and the teacher's giving lots of active supervision, I'm going to be on task more, right? Above 80% of the time, at 85% of the time. So these are not things that we're saying, oh, here's some simple things, just do them. There's real research behind them. And they are simple. And that's why we're bringing them to you. Because these small things can have a huge impact on your students. When we learn with what we learn with pleasure, we never forget, right? We want to create that environment where kids feel accepted, even if they struggle, right? Bob and I are up in Massachusetts at the May Institute, and we have the marathon. And I like to say to my schools, we are not, and I live right on the marathon route. I have an apartment right on the marathon route. So every year I'm there and cheering on. And it's not just the elite runners that we're excited about. It's the average everyday runners who are coming. And I'm at about the 10-mile mark, and you can just see they're just so dear, like, oh my gosh, am I going to make it another 13 miles, right? And we're calling, go, you can do it, Rebecca, you got this, right? And you can just feel their energy, and they're like, yeah, I do got this. And they start running a little faster. That's like education. We want to get everyone past that finish line. Doesn't matter how they get there and how hard it is, right? There are runners in that race that are blind, that are physically disabled, but they have someone supporting them. So academically, it's the same thing. Some kids might need a lot more support to graduate, to get to that next level grade, to read, but they're all going to get there, and we should be as excited for all of them, and we should have high expectations for all kids, because even the most struggling kids, if their teacher believes in them, they believe in themselves, and that's where we want to get to. So please try these 4 strategies, maximize your structure and predictability, build those relationships, up that praise to correction ratio, and actively engage your students. And I think you'll see a really big payoff. And these are the kids who are going to change the world and run it for us. So we want them to be the best little citizens they can be. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Christine and Bob, for that amazing presentation and so much really amazing content that we can implement right away. We do have time for perhaps one question. I'm just going to pop the survey link in the chat for everyone, and then we can ask a few questions. So one question that we got was, if you are a teacher at a school site who's excited about this content and would like to get started in bringing these methods to their district, how would you suggest they get started?
Well, first, I might ask Rebecca, is this a statewide initiative that they can get a part of? Because I don't know how your state runs. Sorry. But if not, I would go to PBIS.org and start looking there. There's a wealth of information. Bob, do you have something else?
Yeah, I was going to say the other thing is share this presentation. And in terms of that, there's a lot of, we tried to make this as useful as we could so that you could actually take it back to your faculty and talk about these things. We would certainly, if you have questions for us, you can certainly email us in terms of how to get started in terms of that. And Christine gave you a lot of suggestions in terms of how you can just even take some of your own data, or have a peer come in and can you come in and look at what I'm doing in my classroom in terms of that. We love like the simple strategy of just bringing your friend in, right? And say, hey, can you check me out in terms of how am I doing, and give me some feedback, and I'll do it with you in terms of that. So, that's kind of a simple strategy along those lines, right? That you can do. There was a question in Q&A.
Yeah, I was just about to ask that as well.
Yeah.
So we know that students who struggle academically can sometimes act out behaviorally. And the question in the Q&A generally asked, can you speak to the importance of teaching both sides of that MTSS umbrella, both academics and behavioral supports, with fidelity?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we look at kids holistically. And I've sat in on team meetings where people are complaining about the student's behavior, and I say, why don't we check his academic performance? Right? And no, that's not a problem. And 45 minutes later, they came around and said, oh, okay, let's look at that. And his math performance was 2 grade levels below, and that whereas where he was having problems. And well, we need to really address the academics as well. So we really need to look at. And as I started off, and Christine, both of us feel, and the research supports that, 1/3 to 50% of the kids have deficits oftentimes in both areas, and that we really have to address both areas, not just one area along those lines. So I love that question because, we think we need to look at kids holistically, both even in school and what's happening at home, because they're, all of those things impact on that. What we're trying to do is give you some simple strategies that would help improve on task behavior engagement. But, if those don't really work, if you implement fidelity, then you really need to look at in terms of kind of where do we go? What's next in terms of that?
And I'm just going to piggyback on that, Bob. collecting data is so important. And even those minor behaviors, because sometimes at elementary school teachers, they wait to sort of record behavior till it's really big, but then we don't see the patterns. So if we can collect that data, even the minor disruptions, and we, even on a piece of paper, right? And look and say, you know what? It is always right around this activity. Even if I mix it up during the day, if when we go into math, they all start to have this issue. What is it about that? We can start figuring out the function of what's going on. So collecting data is so important. What time, what activity, what was happening in the room? That's going to lead you to some of these answers and how to address it.
And
Wonderful.
those 2 case studies that Christine presented, those were teachers that had 15 years of experience. So those aren't very new teachers. And they were really felt like they were struggling. They weren't having much fun, and literally doing that a little professional development with them. They said, "Wow, I feel much more comfortable. My class is much easier to manage." And my friend is here. So it made a real big difference. We actually do teacher efficacy scales, and we see a real big difference in terms of learning those strategies.
Wonderful. Well, thank you guys both for sharing this with us today. And I want to thank you for your time on behalf of Glean Education, OSPI, and the Structured Literacy Within an MTSS Framework initiative. And thank you to our wonderful attendees. We look forward to seeing you next webinar next month with Dr. Shiraki Holly. And that's on April 13th. Please register for that event. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.